Hi, I appreciate you all being here, listening to my presentation. I'm here today to talk about God. Specifically, I'm here today to talk about trying to use anti-God existent arguments to derail arguments and points made against God's existence on other argument points, specifically evolution. There's a common argument that evolution accounts for the complexity of life, and that God is merely an afterthought, and if anything, complicates and muddles the entire argument. I believe, instead of fighting on this point, if you're someone who is arguing for God's existence, you need to give in on this point. You need to admit the existence of evolution, and it will actually help you derail bigger fish to fry, more arguments down the line from your anti-God opponents. For example, if you admit that evolution has some sort of role and is part of the reason and accounts for the complexity of life, then further down the road, you can it will help when they bring up the argument that God is all-loving or all-powerful. Because there's an argument made from the anti-God side that God cannot be all-loving and or all-powerful. God can only be one or the other, because they're inherently contradicting because of all the bad stuff that happens in life. God cannot be powerful and all-loving. You can actually keep this to yourself, because if evolution plays such a role in our lives, you can just say that God is in charge of all creation, which makes him all-powerful and all-loving. If God creates all life in existence, that is all-loving and all-powerful. God has limited influence over the course of your life and is merely responsible for all creation and all power in that sense, then you can blame anything bad happens in life on evolution. This leads further down the line to hit another argument point, which is the divine hiddenness of God. Now, the natural argument that most pro-God, God's existence, arguers and debaters would make is that God intentionally hides himself to see which of his followers have true faith and true commitment to stay with it in the face of no evidence. But I think what you could do here is saying that, well, if God is in charge of all creation and all life and all birth in that sense, then why would God need to show himself during your life? What does that bring God? If God puts life out there for it to work its ways, you could say that God is not a tyrant. God is merely a life giver in that sense. And by this definition, it will make your argument stronger, and it could derail your opponent's arguments when it comes to the divine hiddenness of God, evolution, and that God can only be all-loving or all-powerful. If you do this and just cave on evolution, you can maybe actually get a meaningful result in your debate, and you can get maybe your opponent to talk about the fact that God might exist. This will catch your opponent way off guard, and their future arguments will seem more